Today we are going to talk about cell processes. You may need to pause this PowerPoint throughout this PowerPoint presentation to be able to fill in the blanks of your notes packet. Some important vocabulary when talking about cell processes include chemical energy, which is the energy stored in the bonds between atoms of every molecule. Glucose is the major energy source for most cells that is stored in the sugar molecule. Chlorophyll is a light-absorbing pigment, which is a colored substance that traps the energy in sunlight. Chlorophyll is located in what? If you said chloroplast, you were right. You should remember this from when we were talking about plant and animal cells and chloroplast as an organelle. Photosynthesis only occurs in plants. That means that it does not include animals. Photosynthesis does not occur in animals. It's only in plants. The starting materials needed for photosynthesis to be carried out include carbon dioxide, and the chemical symbols for carbon dioxide is CO2. And carbon dioxide is taken in by the plant, so it is inhaled, you could say. And it also needed is water, and the chemical symbol for that is H2O. And the plants get this from the soil that they're planted in. Step 2, which is the process, the actual process. So carbon dioxide and water enter the chloroplast. Chlorophyll captures the sunlight energy needed, and it changes the carbon dioxide and the water into new products. Those new products include glucose and oxygen, because the plant releases the oxygen, which is considered the waste product because plants don't need the oxygen. We do, humans, animals. And it keeps the glucose for energy. So it keeps that sugar molecule for energy. And this should kind of sound a little familiar because we discussed this a little bit with plant cells when we went over the organelles. And this is just a little diagram to show you the process of photosynthesis, but in a visual way. Releasing energy. Cells release energy in two different processes. One of those processes is cellular respiration, and then the other is fermentation. Cellular respiration occurs in both plant cells and animal cells. The starting materials needed in order for cellular respiration to be carried out include glucose, which is the sugar molecule, and oxygen. The actual process of cellular respiration includes that glucose is broken down into the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm, again, is the gel-like material in a cell. And energy is released, and it moves to mitochondria, along with the oxygen. Hydrogen is then released and allows the cell to trap the energy. And hydrogen and oxygen make the water, hence the H2O. The final products include energy, water, and carbon dioxide of cellular respiration. Fermentation, this is where cells release energy without the use of oxygen. So cellular respiration includes oxygen. You have to have oxygen for cellular respiration. However, with fermentation, you do not need oxygen. It does not require oxygen. It's a process done totally without oxygen. And it happens in the cytoplasm and not the mitochondria. So it occurs in the gel-like material and not mitochondria. Diffusion. Diffusion is the process where molecules spread out or move from areas where there are many of them, which is considered a high concentration, toward areas of where there's fewer of them, which is lower concentration. This is a little diagram, as you can see, what a high concentration is, where there's a lot of particles. Whereas with low concentration, there's fewer and they're more spread out. So it kind of goes back to our weather unit where we talked about how wind travels from higher pressures moves from higher pressure to lower pressure. Well, just like when we were discussing wind in the weather unit, diffusion works the same way. It's trying to maintain balance and equalize. So the particles are going to, in the higher concentration, move toward the lower concentration to even it out, so that way they'll be equal. Diffusion in cells are where you've got photosynthesis that produces oxygen inside the cell. The concentration of oxygen molecules then becomes higher inside the cell than outside the cell, and the oxygen molecules move out of the cell through the process of diffusion. And again, this is just another diagram to show where you've got a higher concentration and it moves toward toward a lower concentration where they're more spread out. This is when where I have already given you guys the lab of the water with the sugar cube and also the water with the food coloring. Whenever I dropped in that sugar cube, well, that sugar cube represented the higher concentration, and then the water was low concentration. So that sugar cube then began to dissolve and break apart, and those particles then became evenly distributed throughout that beaker of water. Same thing with the food coloring. Whenever I dropped in those few drops of food coloring, well, the food coloring was considered higher concentration, and the water was considered lower concentration because it had no particles in it. And then over time, that food coloring evenly distributed around in that water, so all the water was one color and it was equal. So those are two examples of what diffusion looks like. All right, transporting materials. Passive transport, this is where materials move without using the cell's energy, meaning it can transport materials throughout a cell without using any type of energy. Whereas with active transport, it has to use energy to be able to move the materials through a membrane, in and out, okay? Again, a membrane is the cell membrane, where the cell membrane's job is to allow certain things in and certain things out of a cell. It controls what enters and leaves that cell. So the passive transport and the active transport is talking about the use of energy or no use of energy to allow those materials to leave or enter a cell. Osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water through a membrane from an area of higher concentration toward an area of lower concentration. So osmosis is very, very, very similar to what diffusion is. We're talking about water in a cell and out of a cell. So the water, if it is greater outside of the cell than water that is inside the cell, then the water moves into the cell. And there's a typo on my second bullet point, but it says a water outside the cell, and it should say less than the water inside the cell, then the water moves out of the cell. Okay, so again, the second bullet point where it says water outside the cell, if the amount is greater than the water that's on the inside of the cell, then the water is going to move into the cell. If, on the third bullet point, if the water outside of the cell is less than the amount of water that's on the inside of the cell, then the water is going to move out of the cell to the outside of it. And here are the resources that I used for this PowerPoint.